Hey everybody, it's Whimsy, your good boy with good vibes, and I'm back again with another deck for you. As always, if you just want to see the deck lists, I've left links to Architect and Moxfield in the description below, so you can go check them out. For everyone else, I'll be spending the rest of this video discussing the themes and mechanics that went into building the deck. And as always, I've made a little treat for everyone who sticks around till the end. So let's go for a walk. Magic the Gathering recently released a Final Fantasy set, and while they did represent the classic Final Fantasy job system with the job select equipment, they tended to be more focused on characters and events from each game, rather than specific mechanical identities for each of the jobs. So that's why I'm here. I'm going to put a Final Fantasy job under the microscope, see what makes it tick, and try to build a deck around it. Before we get started, I'll go over the rules for the deck building challenge for those of you new to the channel. Rule number 1. Each deck must contain at least one job select equipment if it's available. We may have to make a substitution down the line, but at time of recording there are like 20 of these to go, so we should be okay for a while. Rule number 2. Each deck must contain at least one crystal card. If we're building a mono blue deck, we have to put the water crystal in it, even if we're not planning to mill our opponents out. Rule number 3. Each deck must contain at least one summon card. We'll be trying to pick the best summon based on the actual mechanical identity of each deck, so we won't just be jamming Bahamut in everything. Rule number 4. Play Final Fantasy cards. This does not mean that every single commander has to be a Final Fantasy character, but it does mean that we will be using the Final Fantasy variant art where it makes sense to. It also means we'll be playing a handful of cards that don't necessarily belong in these decks. You don't really want a Chromatic Lantern in a single color deck, but Crystal of Altar Cave is here anyway, just for the vibes. Rule number 5. No game changers. These are not budget decks, and we are not restricting ourselves to specific brackets. However, when you have access to best-in-class cards like Teferi's Protection, it's really hard to argue against jamming them into every deck in its colors. So we're just going to cut ourselves off from these cards altogether and try to come up with some more creative solutions to our problems. Alright, with the rules out of the way, let's finally get started on the deck. Today's deck is the Dark Knight. Now, while Paladin grew up and found religion and Warrior had a bit of an identity crisis along the way, Dark Knight really showed up to school knowing exactly what it wanted to be when it grew up. Unfortunately for some, what it wants to be is...
You're not the warrior of darkness.
Yes, I am. Look at my sword.
It's going to be my job to see if we can find some hidden depths in the dark, or if this is all edge with no point. So almost right away we find some difficulty identifying exactly what a Dark Knight is. For those of you who don't know, the first Dark Knight that appeared in Final Fantasy was actually Leon from Final Fantasy II. Unfortunately, that game didn't have a job system, and instead allowed you to level up skills on basically anybody that you wanted, so the fact that he was called a Dark Knight didn't really mean anything. Final Fantasy III also had a Dark Knight, but this is actually the War Mage or Magic Swordsman. And the War Mage functions basically the way we imagine a Paladin does. This was fixed in subsequent releases of Final Fantasy III to actually be a Dark Knight as we know it, but the association between War Mage, Mystic Knight, and Dark Knight is something that we're going to see throughout various games, and it comes down to a localization issue, rather than it actually being associated with the job. Because of this, unlike our take on Warrior, where we tried to fit as many different versions of the Warrior into the deck as possible, we're going to be cutting these versions of the Dark Knight out, since they don't actually relate back to the class we're trying to build. Now, the Dark Knight as we know it today was first introduced in Final Fantasy IV with Cecil Harvey. Cecil began his journey as a Dark Knight and changed to Paladin partway through the game, which meant that the Dark Knight had very few skills, since it wasn't expected that you'd level it up very high. Its signature ability is the Darkness skill, which allows you to sacrifice health in order to deal extra damage. While this would be the signature ability of Dark Knights moving forward, it's in no way exclusive to the job. We'd see a variety of characters using abilities called Soul Eater, which function similarly to Darkness throughout the series. Dark Knight returns in Final Fantasy X-2 as a dress sphere, where it once again has the Darkness ability, but this time it's a bit more fleshed out. In addition to Darkness, it has a small list of spells called Arcana, which include Drain, which allowed you to absorb HP from your opponents, and Death, which, you know. Anyway, in Final Fantasy XI, Dark Knight was a strong melee DPS job, thanks to the ability Soul Eater. It had a little bit of a twist on Soul Eater this time. Instead of it being a single attack it could use, Soul Eater was a buff it could give itself. For the duration of Soul Eater, all of your melee attacks would consume part of your HP to deal extra damage. This could allow you to deal devastating damage with the right builds, but also made it really difficult to manage threat properly. To help offset how much HP you were consuming on the regular, they also had a skill called Blood Weapon, which allowed them to gain a similar buff to Soul Eater, only this time you absorbed HP from your opponent when you hit them. In addition to absorbing HP with the Blood Weapon skill and the Drain spell, the Dark Knight also featured a list of exclusive Absorb spells that allowed it to actually steal stats from its opponents. All of these draining effects, in addition to its new association with the Scythe weapon, gave it kind of a Reaper of Death feel. Our last stop is Final Fantasy XIV, where they really threw a wrench in the works. While a lot of jobs take design cues directly from Final Fantasy XI, the Dark Knight in Final Fantasy XIV is actually categorized as a tank. The nature of tanks in MMOs makes it really hard to justify consuming your HP in order to deal that extra damage like all of the other versions of Dark Knight do. They still had access to abilities called Soul Eater and Blood Weapon, but aside from its general aesthetic and association with dark magic, it doesn't actually share that much in common with traditional Dark Knights. Normally this might be enough to exclude it, for the same reasons we excluded Mystic Knights earlier. However, this is the most contemporary version of the job being presented, and it does give us a few tools that I think will be very useful in the deck build. So let's put a pin in that and go look at some cards. Okay, so our first touch point is the Dark Knight's Greatsword. For 2 and a black, you get a 1/1 colorless hero creature token that is attached to Dark Knight's Greatsword, gets +3/+0, and becomes a knight in addition to its other types. The equip ability allows you to pay 3 life instead of paying mana to equip it to a creature. Being able to sacrifice our health in exchange for more damage is very on flavor for the Dark Knight, and being able to cheat mana costs is actually a pretty valuable ability. So I think this is maybe the best one of these that we've looked at so far. Our other Dark Knight card is of course Cecil Dark Knight. He's a 1 mana, 2/3 human knight with Death Touch and the Darkness ability. When Cecil deals damage, you lose that much life. Then if your life total is less than or equal to half your starting life total, untap Cecil and transform it. He becomes the Paladin at this point, which is very on flavor for him in the context of the story of Final Fantasy IV, but it really doesn't give you any more Dark Knight to build off of. I also want to shout out this version of Exsanguinate from the Commander deck that explicitly depicts a Dark Knight in the art, casting what appears to be Abyssal Drain. We don't really have any other Dark Knights in the set or Dark Knight cards, however, Final Fantasy XI's version of Dark Knight had a Reaper of Death aesthetic, so it is tempting to include the Reaper's Scythe here as well, but Reaper is considered to be its own job at present, so I'm gonna try to build a separate deck for that later. As you can tell from earlier, Dark Knight is a very simple and straightforward job. It's really about sacrificing your hit points in order to gain more power, and then using different abilities to drain hit points from your opponents to keep yourself alive. So this may be one of the more straightforward game plans we've had, but it's going to be difficult to pull off. Essentially, we want to max out on the Darkness ability, which allows us to spend our life in order to gain additional power. The easiest way to convert life total into power in Magic is probably Phyrexian mana, and Karik, Son of Yawgmoth seems like a slam dunk for this deck. But we're not playing him in the command zone simply because I think we gain some benefits by adding white. For instance, Vona, Butcher of Magan allows you to pay 7 life to destroy any non-land permanent, and we can use cards like Paladin of Atonement and Children of Corliss to gain some of that life back. You can't pay life if you don't have it, so it's important to have some amount of life gain in the deck. Another thing I want to bring up here is that in Final Fantasy XIV, the Dark Knight has an ability called Living Death, which allows it to survive at 0 or less life. This is exactly the kind of effect that you find on cards like Phyrexian Unlife. So with all this in mind, I really think we want Cecil Dark Knight in the command zone for this deck. That also allows us to run the really cool Timna the Weaver with Cecil Harvey art on it from Yoshitaka Amano. Alright, so for equipment, we have the Dark Knight's Greatsword, which we discussed earlier, but I think the most Dark Knight weapon in the whole game is probably Pact Weapon. As long as it's attached to a creature, you don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. There's your Living Death again. Whenever equipped creature attacks, draw a card, reveal it, and then the creature gets +X and you lose X life, where X is that card's mana value. You can equip it by discarding a card too, so we're cheating mana costs and we're gaining a lot of power in exchange for our life. I also want to include Vorpal Sword. It's a really cool thematic addition with the ability to knock a player out, no matter how much life they've gained, which matches our death spell as closely as we can. It's very tempting in any deck that uses a life gain strategy to include the infamous Sanguine Bond Exquisite Blood combo. We're going to be avoiding that explicitly, but we do want some effects that just end a game for somebody. With that in mind, we're also including Summon Primal Odin. His Zantetsuken effect also is a game ender for whatever player he hits, and the fact that this one is also a Dark Knight character is just icing on the cake. Our main focus is on being able to spend our life to do stuff, so we're going to be using Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor, as well as Dark Confidant and Darkstar Augur. We want a decent number of instants and sorceries as well, seeing as how we are a magic swordsman, even if we're themed around darkness and slaying our enemies with our massive swords. Cards like Toxic Deluge and that Exsanguinate from earlier are definitely going in here. We also want to have the ability to save ourselves from crackbacks, so I like Angel's Grace, Darkness, and Stunning Reversal for that. Special shout out to this card Hatred from Exodus that allows you to pay X life and give target creature +X+0 until end of turn. This is the Darkness effect, but the interesting part is it's an instant, so you can play it during your opponent's attacks as well. Now there aren't too many abilities that trigger off of you losing life. The ones that stand out to me are Font of Agonies, which allows you to turn your life loss into creature removal, and Vilis Broker of Blood, which allows you to draw cards every time you lose life. And even though we're not planning to combo off with it, we are including Bloodthirsty Conqueror. He's a knight, and he gives us the ability to gain life when an opponent loses life, so that blood weapon effect. We will also be playing both crystals in this deck, the Wind Crystal and the Darkness Crystal, mostly for life gain reasons. So how are we planning to win the game? Well, we do have the Exsanguinate, but we're also planning to lose a bunch of life. So weaponizing that against our opponents is going to be key as well. We're including Soul Conduit, which allows us to exchange the life totals of 2 different players. And we're also including Repay in Kind. This is a really unique card that allows us to set everyone's life total to the lowest life total at the table. It doesn't matter if we're in a winning position or if we've paid a ton of life to any of our effects. We can cast Repay in Kind to set everyone to like sub 10 life totals, making an Exsanguinate win or just combat damage even easier to pull off. Now is normally where I talk about upgrades for the deck, but the upgrade path for this deck is pretty straightforward. If you wanted to put this into a higher bracket, you could run it as a Karik deck. use Aetherflux Reservoir combo off, right? You include cards like Bolas' Citadel, and you do Sanguine Bond Exquisite Blood combo. Like, those are all definitely ways to upgrade the deck, but I feel like you get further away from the Knight aesthetic the closer you get to being a combo deck, you know? I have started including a small selection of additional cards that I am considering for upgrades for this deck. I wanted to mention it here because they're going to start showing up in my deck lists from now on. The card I'm most excited about out of the whole list so far is actually Daily Bugle Building. Our commander is a 1-mana creature with 2 power and Death Touch. Smear Campaign giving us Menace for relatively cheap means that we're guaranteed to take out 2 of our opponent's creatures if they choose to block us at all. And that's the deck. I have yet to actually playtest one of these. I am kind of interested in seeing if I can get some folks together on like Tabletop Sim or something where we can proxy everything more easily once I get enough of these built. For now, though, it's token time. Da 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 da. I gotta sing along, it's tradition now. Anyway, eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that I do not have all of my jobs leveled. Kinda outed myself with that one. That does make gaining access to some of the cooler outfits and locations that I want to use in the game just a little bit more difficult and time-consuming to get to. But I'm really happy with how it turned out, so hopefully you also think it was worth the time investment? I don't know. It might be interesting if I could get some character pictures from the community for the next ones, but for now, I'm using my own character. Anyway, I will see you in the next one. I think this is the part where I'm supposed to say like, comment, and subscribe. Something outro. Darkness!